Jim Naughton is a familiar face, two-time Tony winner. You've seen him on Broadway in City of Angels in Chicago. Been in movies like The Devil Wears Prada, TV shows like Who's the Boss? He directed a guy named Paul Newman in Our Town on Broadway, and a longtime West End resident who is deeply involved in many activities in our area. So, Jim, thanks for stopping by the Westport Library stage today.
Nice to be here, Dan, with you.
Great to have you. So, a little-known fact. You played soccer at Brown University.
As did you.
I was a wannabe.
I think we both played for the same coach a few years apart.
Cliff Stevenson.
That's right.
So what is the route from Conard High School in West Hartford to Brown to the Yale School of Drama and then to Westport and then Weston?
Well, I did play soccer and baseball in high school at Conard in West Hartford and was recruited to play at Brown. And I had applied to Brown, this is a stretch to imagine, in pre-med. And so when I got there, a couple of my older classmates, guys that I'd gone to high school with who were there ahead of me at Brown, said, there's no way you can play soccer and be in pre-med because you have labs in the afternoon. So you can't do both. And why don't you just play soccer now? And the requirements for med school, even then, were beginning to liberalize. You can just probably go along and if you're still interested in a couple of years, you can take some science classes and qualify to get into med school. So I said, okay, and I played soccer, and I played baseball, and I sang in a singing group called the Jabberwocks, and they're still there.
Yeah.
And in the November of my junior year, I wandered into the theater for the first time. And because a girl at Pembroke named Judy Pulver had said, oh, you should stop by the theater tonight. I had never been in the theater at Brown. And they were auditioning for a show, and the legendary head of the drama department there, Jim Barnhill, who just died last year, a month shy of 100 years old, said, okay, who's next? And Judy did one of these, and she pointed to me. So he said, okay, come on, get up here and audition. I said, oh, I'm not here to audition. I didn't know they were having auditions. And I said, I'm just here to visit. And he said, don't be shy, get up there, sing us a song. And what have you done? I said, well, I haven't done anything. What do you mean? He said, well, what shows have you been in? I said, well, I did a few musicals in high school. He said, okay, well, you can sing a song from. So I got up and sang a song from Annie, Get Your Gun. And then he said, okay, here, take a look at this scene. Go on out in the hall and read it and come back in 10 minutes and we'll do it. So I did, and he said, okay, come here. And he said to everybody, take 5. And he said, you've obviously been on the stage before. What are you, a freshman? And I said, no, I'm a junior. He goes, where the hell have you been? And I said, I've been playing soccer and baseball. And he said, he actually did say, one of those. He did. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'd like you to be in the show. And I said, well, we're in the NCAA tournament. It's the end of November. And we play until we get ousted. I couldn't possibly do both this and that. And he said, no, you couldn't. When soccer's over, will you come back and see me? So I forgot about it. And in December and Christmas vacation, and we went back to school. It was January. I was looking around for an arts course to take to satisfy a requirement for graduation. And I'm not artistically inclined in graphic arts. So I thought maybe that drama, maybe I could take a drama course. And I went and found Jim Barnhill's office, and I knocked on the door, and he opened it up, and he said, Jim, come on in. I'm glad you came to see me. And he sat me down, and just like this, Dan, he said, I think you could do this if you wanted to. And I said, but you mean for real? And he said, yeah. And nobody had ever suggested anything like that to me. And I said, well, how do I get there from here? And he said, you take my class. It's a scene study class. It meets 3 hours in the afternoon, 4 days a week. I said, wow, that's a lot of time. He said, yes, it is. And in a year and a half, when you graduate, you go to Yale Drama School. So I did. And I was at Yale Drama School for 2 days. He didn't tell me you had to audition to get in, but a year later I found that out. And I was there for 2 days, and I went, oh, I finally figured out where I belonged. Because I didn't know where I belonged. Wow. And I was really I used to envy the engineers in school because they had a whole program set up, and, you know, I never knew what courses to take or what I was doing or where I belonged. And that's how I got there.
All it takes is one person, one sentence, one. Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you end up first in Westport and then to Weston?
Well, we lived in New Haven, and I had 2 children, one when I was still in graduate school, Greg, and I started working after I graduated at the Yale Rep, which was a great job, first job to have. I was immediate full equity member. And then I got some jobs in New York, and we moved to Stamford to be closer to New York, because commuting from New Haven on the theater schedule is not a good deal if you have a family. And I lived in Stamford for a couple of years, and then went to LA and did some television, and then came back and bought our house in Weston in 1977. And so, of course, I knew.
For how much?
Well, a lot less than it is worth now, but more than I could afford at the time, you know, which is crazy. But that's how I wound up in the Weston community.
And what kept you here?
The Westport community, which is quite wonderful. I was working on Broadway quite a lot, and going back and forth. Back in the day when you used to be able to get in the car at 5:30 and, you know, be in the city pretty dependably before 7 or 7:30. Now you have to leave at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to town tonight to see my daughter-in-law Kelly O'Hara in a show at the Roundabout, and we're going to leave at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
So that we make sure that we get there, and, you know.
Sure.
And I used to play all kinds of wonderful sports, basketball and racquetball and squash at the old Y in Westport. Back when they had, and you and I used to belong to the men's health club there, and I am so sorry that doesn't exist anymore. Every day, that was wonderful, and they didn't replace it, and they haven't, and that's a huge loss to the community, I think.
Still a great Y.
Yeah, well, I don't go there anymore. They don't have any racket sports there.
No, including badminton, which Paul Newman used to play.
We used to play badminton in the gym downstairs at the old Y, because Paul had played badminton as a young man, and he asked me if I could find some other badminton players. So I got a couple of our old racket sports players, squash players, together, and we developed into a pretty good little badminton club, which we did for years.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Westport Country Playhouse. Been in the headlines the last few months, almost went the way of so many other long-gone institutions. What's been your association with the Playhouse?
Well, I've worked there a bunch. I've directed there more than I've acted there. My association with summer theater was very strong with the Williamstown Theater Festival up in Massachusetts. I spent most of every year there between 1980 and 2000. But I was also, toward the end of that time, working at the Playhouse. And what's going on with the Playhouse now is similar to what's going on with lots of other theaters in the country. I think it's post-COVID. That's part of the problem. It's the dominance of streaming. And so the combination, I think, has been really a death blow to a lot of the summer theaters. People aren't coming out anymore. They don't have to. We all got used to staying home and watching things on TV. And the paradigm for how to fund theater has changed, because people used to buy a subscription for the summer, for the 5 or 6 shows that each of these theaters would produce. And they aren't doing that anymore. And that has really made financing summer theater just about impossible. The Atlanta big theaters, the Amundsen in L.A. and the Mark Taper Forum have had trouble. Williamstown's had trouble. The big theater in Atlanta has had, I mean, they're all having trouble. And we'll see how we weather the storm, whether we can.
What would Westport lose if it had lost the Playhouse?
Well, you know, I was having a conversation at one of the events that you and I were at last week, and I was talking to a guy who was on the board at the Playhouse, and I was telling him how the Williamstown used to work, and that one of the great assets there was this cabaret that they developed, and that came out of really organically what was going on after the plays. There was a bar at the Williams Inn, and it had a piano in the bar. And after the shows, the actors and the crew and people would go over to the bar and have what we call a hang, you know, and have a couple of beers. And somebody sat down at the piano one night, and somebody started to sing. And the next thing you knew, people in the audience realized and had heard that the actors were doing stuff after the shows over at the bar. And so Nikos Sakaropoulos, who was the founder of the Williamstown Theater Festival and was a wonderful mentor and director to a lot of us, he had a great entrepreneurial sense. And so he institutionalized the cabaret. And it became a big deal. It became a huge draw. And people would go out and after the plays, it gave people a place to go and something to do. It was great for business and for the restaurants that housed us. And we would go there were 3 different venues. There was the 1896 house, there was the Williams Inn, and there was the British Maid. And they would take turns hosting the cabarets. So this fellow that I was talking to on the board of the Playhouse said, "We need to do that in town." I go, "Well, yeah. All you need is some place to go that has a piano, you know, or even people could bring guitars in. You could have an after-hours place, and it would be great for the community, you know. So we'll see. But on the other hand, I think most importantly, to be able to do the kind of theater that we used to do in Williamstown, which was not straw hat theater, unlike Westport, which had a tradition of doing stuff on the straw hat circuit when Jim was the producer here.
Jim McKenzie
for so many years. That material was quite a bit less serious, but it was still an awful lot of fun. It was entertainment. And that's really what we're talking about, aren't we? Yeah.
You're much more than an entertainer. I know you are very involved legislatively with Connecticut's medical aid in dying.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a crusade for a number of years.
Well, it's been a crusade for me for about the last 6 years. Because I had the unfortunate experience of losing a wife to pancreatic cancer 10 years ago after a 4-year battle with that disease, which is a long time to exist with it and to fight it. But after she'd been gone for a few years, this issue, the idea of medical aid in dying, or the right to die with dignity, as it's also called in some states, became something that I gravitated toward and being interested in, because I had some firsthand knowledge about it. And so now I've testified up in Hartford, I think 5 years in a row, before the Public Health Committee, which is incidentally has been chaired for the last 4 or 5 years, by Westport's Representative Jonathan Steinberg, and he's been really a hero in trying to get this law passed. It hasn't been passed yet. We're very close. We know that 75% of Connecticut residents want it, and that goes across all the demographics and all religious stripes. Yeah, there are 2 groups that are fighting us, and have been traditionally fighting us. And so far, they've been successful, but we have hopes that won't continue. One of them is the institution of the Catholic Church, which spends hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to kill this bill. And the other group...
What's their opposition?
Well, I don't know.
Strictly theological?
Yeah, I guess so. You'd have to ask them, you know. I think it has to do with the idea of the sanctity of life. And the other group is a group of people with disabilities. And they are promoting a falsehood that people with disabilities might be pressured into taking their lives early by people who might profit from that, meaning whom? Their heirs? That's a felony, by the way, if it were to happen. And the reason I say it's a falsehood is because we've looked back. This law has been in place in Oregon since 1997. That was the first state to pass it. Since then, 9 other states and the District of Columbia have passed it. And if you check with all of those states, there isn't any evidence that people with disabilities are being taken advantage of in this way. So that's just not true. And we have the paperwork to back that up. Those are the 2 groups that have been against us, and I don't understand. Even people with disabilities, 70 to 75% of people with disabilities in Connecticut are for this law, according to all the latest Gallup polls. Anyway, that's what's going on, and we're getting close.
So you must have come in contact with some people with some harrowing stories.
Well, part of the problem that I've had with going up there every year for the last 6 years is the other people who are testifying. And by the way, in order to understand this, the Public Health Committee of the state legislature, made up of the senators and representatives, has to have hearings every year. Those hearings go on all day and all night. I mean, they'll have 15 or 16 hours of sitting there listening to people like me tell these horror stories of what has happened with our loved ones and why we're supporting and asking them to please pass this law. That's what Jonathan Steinberg has been chairing, that committee. And every year I go up there and I meet people, maybe I saw them the year before or the year before that, who have stage 4 metastatic lung cancer or ovarian or uterine cancer or some other lethal kind of cancer, who are still hanging on and are begging the legislators to please pass this law because they know they're going to need it. One of those people that I met was a woman in Connecticut who had spent her career as a hospice nurse. And she had stage 4 metastatic lung cancer. And she said, please do this. I know what's coming. I've spent my entire career. And they haven't done it yet. So I heard recently that a year or so ago, she sold her house and established residency in New Jersey, which is where it's, in our neighborhoods, Maine, Vermont, and New Jersey have passed the law. She's gone about the trouble of getting her doctors down there to sign on, because it requires 2 doctors to stipulate that you have 6 months or less to live before you can apply for this in any of these states. And I thought, this is cruel. Just at the time, at the end of your life, when you're depending on your friends and family and your home and your doctors, you have to uproot and go live somewhere else so that you can die there mercifully and end your suffering, if it comes to that. Because we don't know, and they don't know, and she doesn't know if it's going to come to that, but it does. And it's for those people that this law is necessary. In my wife's case, after fighting for 4 years, one day, finally, she said to me, Jimmy, I don't want to wake up anymore. And that night, when I crawled into bed with her, she woke up and she peered at me and she said, oh, I thought I wasn't going to have to wake up anymore.
Oh, boy.
And when your loved one gets to that point, there's nothing that you wouldn't do for her.
Yeah.
So that's why we need this. And the other thing that I've found is, because I've met a lot of people in this situation as a result of my involvement with the issue, is we found that for folks who go to the trouble of applying for it, go jump through all the hoops to get this medication prescribed for them. It takes away the fear. And so they go, okay, I've got everything in place. If I need this, if my suffering gets to be too much to bear, this is there for me.
Wow.
And it takes, and so they get to enjoy the last months that they have with their loved ones. It also takes away the fear for their families.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
It seems to me it's the merciful thing to do. A doctor that we know and love, Dr. Altbaum, told me recently. He said, because people have asked about, well, what about the Hippocratic Oath? You do no harm. He said the Hippocratic Oath is about prolonging life and alleviating suffering. It's not about prolonging death and extenuating suffering. And that's his attitude about it. He's very much in favor of having this legislation pass.
Well, it is. They can have no stronger advocate than you. So,
thanks, Dan.
So good luck with that in the coming legislative year.
We're cranking away.
I know you are. You're also very involved with animals. Wildlife in Crisis up there in the woods of Weston.
Yeah, Wildlife in Crisis. I knew about it because a friend of mine had asked me if I would narrate a video that they had made. And so I said, sure. You know, that's not hard to do. I do a lot of voiceovers and that kind of thing. And so I knew about it, but I hadn't ever been there, and I hadn't had any personal attachment to them until one day my dogs out in our backyard, I heard them yapping in a strange way, and I walked out there, and they were trying to play with this little hours-old fawn that had a broken front leg.
Wow.
And so my dogs weren't harming it, but they were very interested in it. Yeah. And so I called Wildlife in Crisis, and they called me back and they said, can you bring it up here? And I said, well, I don't know. It had gotten dark by this point. I said, I'll have to go out and see if I can find him. So Pam and I, my late wife, and I went out in the evening at 8 o'clock at night with a flashlight. And you know, these little tiny fawns, they can get down so low, they can disappear in Pachysandra. I mean, they can really get down. I mean, that's what they do. That's their defense mechanism.
It's their job.
Because their mothers leave them all day long and go out and forage and then come back and nurse them. But they have to be safe someplace, so they're pretty good at hiding. Well, we found him, and I wrapped him in a towel, and Pam drove, and I sat in the passenger seat with this little guy on my lap, petting him like a puppy. And we drove up into Wildlife in Crisis up in the woods, and Dara and Peter Reed are the couple who run it. She took a look at him, and she said, oh, this is a good clean break. Yeah, we'll put a pin in this. We'll fix him. And I looked around at what was going on there, and I was in their home is where they live, and they've built these outbuildings and out cages, and they had raptors in one cage, like 12 or 13 red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks and all kind. And they had another thing with just owls, barred owls. They had like 5 barred owls. And they had a coyote down there that had been injured and hit by a car, and they'd fixed it. And they had, it was in the spring, and they had all these little...
Sounds like the Peaceable Kingdom.
Well, but it was crazy because they had all these little cages and little boxes and filled with baby bunnies and baby squirrels and baby birds that people had brought up to them. And there must have been, I don't know, hundreds of animals in the office. And I said, how do you provide for this? How do you fund this? She said, well, funding is actually part of the issue. She said, I said, well, what do you need? She said, well, what we could really use is like a feature article in like Westport magazine or some such thing to let people know that we're here. And maybe that would get them to. So I called the gal who runs it. Diane is the editor there and has been for a long time. And I said, do you know about this organization? She said, well, I've heard something about it. I said, well, they could really use a feature article, and it would be a great article because you've got all these animals that you can... She said, well, we'll think maybe we could do something next fall. And I go, no, Diane, they need it. They need it now. And now's the time to go because they're just overwhelmed with babies, you know. Next day she called me. She said, well, if you'll do the photo shoot with us, we'll do it. I said, okay. So Thursday that week, we were up there, and I'm holding my little fawn with a big cast on its arm, on its front leg, in my arms. And that became the cover of Westport magazine. And inside was an article of us holding a baby skunk. God, they're cute, the cutest damn animals. Baby skunks and baby squirrels and little owls, and you know. And this is now 14, 15 years ago. But now they've done another feature article, big photo shoot. And so we're trying to get, it's still amazing to me that there aren't more people who know about it. Unfortunately, it's too well-kept secret. But maybe this will help. Wildlife in Crisis.
Wildlife in Crisis in Weston.
Yeah.
Personal note, your son and daughter-in-law are right around the corner from you.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Oh, it's wonderful. Greg grew, he and Kira, my son and daughter, grew up in Weston and out in the woods, played sports at Weston High School, had a band. Greg had a band with Chris Coogan, who is just a wonderful jazz pianist and who still lives in Weston. And so he got married to Kelly, and they lived for a time in New York City, and they lived for a time in Chappaqua. They had a house there. And finally he got smart, and they came home to Westport. And they live in a terrific house on the river. He's got a boat down at Campo. His son now is a freshman at Staples and is playing jazz piano. Actually, he's been studying with Chris Coogan.
Wow.
Yeah. And in fact, what's today? Today's Monday. On Saturday, this past Saturday, Owen was playing at the Bitter End in New York City, down on Bleecker Street. Yeah, the legendary jazz and rock joint. That was pretty cool. He was very excited about that. With the high school. No, with the School of Rock.
Oh, wow.
Which is he studies with School of Rock. Charlotte, their daughter, is doing all the shows at, what's the name of that organization on the Post Road?
Music Theater of Connecticut.
Music Theater of Connecticut, yeah.
Wow.
She's playing the Baker's Wife in Into the Woods, and they're in rehearsal right now. So all Greg does basically is drive the kids to and from rehearsals and practices.
So we were, a few days ago, I saw you at a private event where you and Kelly and Greg and Chris Coogan were performing.
Yeah.
When you go over to Kelly and Greg's house, do you guys just sing? And with the grandkids too?
Well, actually, that's true. We do. And Kelly...
It's like the Trapp family?
Yeah. Kelly is so busy, and she's working this month in November. She's down and doing a show at Roundabout for a couple of nights, and then she's going to be at Carnegie Hall on, I think, the 17th of November, or the 15th. I'm not sure. 17th, I guess. With Sutton Foster, and then she goes into rehearsal for the Broadway version of The Days of Wine and Roses, written by Adam Gettle, who wrote The Light in the Piazza, which she was in.
She was in there.
Which was quite wonderful. One of my favorite shows. So she's very busy going back and forth to New York, and when Greg is busy too, that means that Poppy gets a phone call and says, could you take the kids to and from? And so Sarah and I are driving Owen and Charlotte around back and forth to all their various, and it's a delight. But when they come to our house and spend the night, the piano is going all the time because Charlotte plays as well. And so if Owen's not on the piano, Charlotte is. And what's better than that, right?
What a great life.
That's great.
So this sort of going full circle, it sounds as if, some people say that Westport and Weston are no longer arts communities. Sounds like they are, at least from your perspective.
Well, I think they are. My grandkids aren't the only two kids in town who are doing all these things. There's a huge contingent of children who are in the music departments. By the way, the Staples music department is really spectacular. I used to MC their
Pops concert.
Yeah, Pops concert
right over
at the
Levitt
Pavilion for several years in a row. And the jazz band and the Orphenians and the concert band and the orchestra, and it's really, really a big operation. Yeah. So I think at least the musical arts in Westport are very, very well accounted for and attended. Yeah.
So these conversations go so quickly, but you want to bring it back to Westport and Weston a little bit. When you're not chauffeuring the grandkids around and playing with your son and daughter-in-law, what's your go-to hangout?
In town?
Yeah.
Home. I'm also a pickleball player. So that has opened me up to another cadre of friends. And trying to organize pickleball games is, takes up a lot more time, unfortunately, than it ought to. But that's been a wonderful thing to do and a lot of fun. But it's just a continuation of what we used to do at the old Y. It used to be squash and racquetball and badminton, and before that, decades before that, I used to play basketball at the Y. Now my son, actually, Greg, he does play at the noon game. So there's that going on. I was excited to see in the paper today, or maybe it was on this website called 06880, that the Cobb's Mill Inn is finally getting resolved and will be rehabilitated because we don't have any place to go in town.
No, you got the lunchbox.
Well, we have the lunchbox, yeah. And we can we can go to Trout Brook Valley, which we do every day. I used to go all over Trout Brook Valley. They instituted a leash law throughout about 3/4 or 7/8 of it, and I haven't gotten over that yet.
Wow.
But we do have one muddy little loop up there where we can take our dog, and we do every day, pretty much. So those are the hangs. But it would be nice to have Cobb's Mill back.
Yeah?
Yeah. And I used to play golf, and that used to take a lot more of my time. And also, socially, it provided a place for a hang at the end of the day. But a shoulder surgery that got infected and went awry and left the surgery ineffective I'm no longer a golfer.
Well, you look great, you sound great, your life is full, you're doing all kinds of interesting things, so it's good to be Jim Naughton.
Thanks, Dan. Before we go, are we about to go?
We are. What do you got for us?
I wanted to give folks something to do if they wanted to get involved with medical aid and dying.
Absolutely.
If they wanted to, because what we need citizens who want this, and we know that 3 out of 4 of us do, to do something. And what they can do is go on Facebook to Compassion and Choices Connecticut, spell out the whole word, and that'll take you to the Compassion and Choices website. And Compassion and Choices is the lobbying group nationally that's trying to get this law passed in every state. And if you like it and follow it, it will lead you to the instructions on how and what to do to become a supporter and bring some more pressure to bear on the right people in our Senate and our legislature and our House of Representatives that are waffling. Compassion and Choices Connecticut. Like and go to and get involved. Write them an email. Call them up. Say, we need this law. You got to get the Judiciary Committee to pass it. That's who has held us up the last 3 years in a row.
All right. You heard it here from Jim Naughton. Go there on Facebook. Rewind this if you need to remember it. And Jim, thank you for a most entertaining half hour. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be with you.
You bet.